People are unbelievably ignorant about history. And I mean, I would include myself in that, you know. I mean, I know what I know about the history, say, preceding the 20th century is very sketchy. It's embarrassingly sketchy, you know. And what young people know about 20th century history is non-existent, especially about the history of the radical left. I mean, how would they know? They're never taught anything about it.
And so that was the first wind, really, that the West got of exactly what was happening in the Soviet Union. But even at that point, the bloody left-wing intellectuals in North America were so damn clueless, and in Europe, that they never paid much attention to it, with the exception of a certain number of people like George Orwell, who wrote 1984 and Animal Farm, which is, of course, a discussion. The main pig in Animal Farm is Stalin, of course, and it's a story, an allegory about the Russian Revolution, whose basic motif is we're all equal, but of course all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Communist and Marxist ideology is very good at addling the weak minds of idiot intellectuals. There was a huge section of the population who was fomenting, I suppose, against the standard, what would you call it, political, psychological, and social order, who were absolutely committed to, you know, the ethic that's encased in statements like from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, which sounds perfectly wonderful if you think about it for about 15 seconds, but if you think about it for 6 months, becomes unbelievably murderous in its reach and intent. You see, the Western intellectuals tried to make excuses for what had happened in the Soviet Union by blaming it on Stalin's cult of personality, perversion of the original accurate Marxist doctrine. So they basically said, well, had Lenin lived, because he died quite young and was replaced by Stalin, had Lenin lived, the promised utopia would have been delivered. But Solzhenitsyn, being an absolute genius, documented the relationship, number one, between the axioms of Marxist and communist thought and the laws that were generated primarily by Lenin, and the construction of these camps and the dekulakization and all the mass murders. He documented the causal relationship between them and laid them clearly at the feet, not of Stalin, but of Lenin. And so that was also a major blow, because it undermined the remaining argument of the left-wing, radical left-wing apologists in the West for the viability of Marxist/communist doctrines. And you still hear people today, many people, when they're faced with the, you know, if they're Marxist in their orientation and they're faced with the data pertaining to what happened in the Soviet Union, they'll say something like, well, that wasn't real Marxism. But one of the things that you might answer to that is, well, fine, except that in every bloody country in the world where that doctrine was implemented, regardless of the wide cultural differences between the cultures, say the Soviet Union, China, Cambodia, and so forth, exactly the same thing happened every time.
Typical British middle-class socialist doesn't like the poor, they just hate the rich. It's like, and that was exactly the feeling I got, that this so-called sympathy, empathy, let's say, for the oppressed had a hell of a lot more to do with vengefulness and resentment with regards to anyone who was seen as having privilege. And I certainly think that that's just, and I was thinking about that the other day. I just did a talk in DC, and I was thinking about, you know, the Marxist claims to sympathy with the working class. Because you might say, well, they actually have sympathy for the working class. Are they really trying to put their positions forward, their needs forward? Or do they just hate the successful, depending on how that's divided up? I thought, well, how do you make a judgment like that? And I had this personal experience, but then I thought, well, that's easy with Marxism. It's like, you just look at all the murders, and then you know whether that was a movement that was genuinely motivated by empathy